Good morning, dear friends. Thank you for being here. Today is the 22nd of Tammuz. It's a Wednesday, and it's this Wednesday. I'm sorry, 22nd of Sivan. It's a Wednesday and the 2nd of June 2nd. We're already looking towards Tammuz because this Shabbos will be Shabbat Mevarchim, the Shabbos that blesses and precedes Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. And we're studying the entire Talmud one page at a time, presently still at the very bottom of Nun Gimel Amud Beis. That's 53b. I should say it's in Mesechus Shabbos, Tractate of Shabbos, chapter 5. And yesterday, well, actually, let me start with a dedication. Today, we're going to dedicate our learning, the Iloi Nishmas, the grandfather of our dear Mark Dienstock. Mark's grandfather was named Meir ben Alexander. And so we'll dedicate today's learning to the Iloi Nishmasa, his Neshama Shavan Aliyah. And as we mentioned yesterday, I don't know if it was here or at Yeshiva night, certainly he's having a lot of Nachas Ruach in heaven, in Gan Eden, knowing that his grandfather and his grandson continues to study Torah and commemorate and remember him as well. So Yasher Koyach, Rav Mark, and his Neshama Shavan Aliyah. I also want to mention the father of one of our dear members, whose Yartzeit will be tonight and tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken, Yosef ben Levi Yitzchak, Reb Nachum's father, his Neshama Shavan Aliyah, and we'll dedicate our learning Iloi Nishmasai for his Neshama as well.
Tomorrow night and Friday. Tomorrow night.
Okay, one day off. So
Okay.
We'll begin dedicating, and certainly it's a wonderful bracha to have Reb Nachum on as well. And of course, we'll start with a prayer for the healing and well-being of all of Klal Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael and abroad, and all those that need a refuah shlema. They should be so blessed. Yesterday, we, in a sense, concluded a segment discussing the permissibility of goats, sheep to have their udders bound to prevent, well, for a variety of reasons. And we discussed it because we initially found two braito that contradicted one another. One stating that it was acceptable to allow I believe it was a goat. Who remembers? Was it a goat or a sheep?
Goat.
A goat may go out bound with their udders bound, and the other text said that a goat may not go out on Shabbos in the public domain with their udders bound. Two contradictory braitot. We got to figure it out. And the Gemara gave three answers. Either each one was discussing a different scenario, tightly and well attached or not well affixed. That was option A. Option B was that we quoted our Mishnah that there are actually three different opinions regarding the binding or the covering of the goats or sheep's udders on Shabbos, and so one braita could be taking one position, and the other braita could be taking the other position. Or alternatively, Rabbi Yehuda himself distinguishes between the function, the purpose of the binding of the udders. Is it done to dry up the milk? That, he says, would be acceptable because it's l'tzorech the animal itself, the animal's well-being. But if it is just to capture the milk, or according to some commentaries, to allow the milk to be preserved, or at the very least with the intention that the milk should not stop being supplied or produced, that might be a problem. So that was yesterday's discussion. And in a sense, we for the moment, we've closed that chapter and we're done with that discussion. But it's going to lead us to a very, very, in my opinion, interesting, thought-provoking story. And to explore that, I'm going to share the screen. And we'll find the page and we'll get started. So we are studying Mesechus Shabbos, Nun Gimel Amud Beis. Let's get our English back in supply. And here we almost are. While we're zooming down, I should say that prior to that, we had another important discussion, which was how much license do we have to care for our animals? Is the alleviation of tsar the paradigm, or even just to bring tainug, which was again an earlier debate between Rav and Shmuel, and that led us to a discussion about the restriction of medical therapy for animals on Shabbos. Do we make a gzeira of shchikas hamamanim, unless we'll grind herbs to heal? And we discussed that the two scenarios our Gemara discussed are explicitly mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch, and we had a chance to explore that yesterday. But again, now we're going to see a fascinating story. I'm going to just hit mute, but I want to ask everyone to please unmute yourself to share all of your wonderful comments, questions, thoughts. We're now going to begin our Gemara here at towards the bottom of Nun Gimel Amud Beis 53. Tana Rabbanan. It's somewhat related. We're talking about udders and milk production. And so the Gemara decides to share with us a wonderful story. It's a tragic story of a man whose wife passed on. And she passed away with a child who needed to suckle, to nurse. But he was so impoverished, he did not have the means to hire a wet nurse to provide, to nurse his son. And in those days, you could not go to the store to buy formula, or perhaps the formula was too expensive as well. So what happens? What do you do? A miracle happened, and he developed breasts that functioned as those of a woman, and he was able to nurse the baby. And indeed, he nursed his baby. So the story, in a sense, is not that unheard of, unfortunately, in the ancient world, and occasionally today, but once upon a time, unfortunately, it's very common. Women many times would die in childbirth. And so he was bereft without a wife. His child survived. I mentioned once before that I think many people, as they study their genealogy, frequently people will find that somewhere in their line there are half siblings, and that's many times a result of two tragedies: either the tragic loss of the mother in labor, in giving birth, or the husband's loss in battle, both which were very, very common if you go back 100 years or more. And so tragically here, that's what happened. He's left without any means to provide for his child, and Hashem makes a miracle and he's able to nurse his child. You hear this story. What is your reaction? Give me some raw reactions. Give me some raw responses. What do you think about when you hear that story?
Well, in addition to being able to understand it, it's strange that it just happened to an ordinary person.
Well, we don't know that it was an ordinary person, do we?
Well, it says Be'echad. If it would be somebody famous, they would have named him.
He's not famous enough to have a name, but we don't know his spiritual caliber, do we?
You think a simpler miracle would be that he found some money that he could pay the witness.
An easier miracle would have been that he was walking on the street with his baby. He didn't know what to do. His baby was crying and hungry, and he happened upon a chest of gold, and he was able to hire a wet nurse, and she provided for the baby. And then that would have been an easier miracle, right?
It was on Shabbas, Mark. He couldn't lift it.
It was on Shabbas. Okay, any other thoughts?
I think, yeah, that's true, because if it's Shabbos, if the miracle happened, he could still nurse the baby. But if it was
interesting,
money,
I hadn't even considered that. You're saying on Shabbos, he would have an immediate solution, as opposed to, because if you find money in a Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos, there's nothing you could really do with that money. Very interesting. Any other thoughts?
I had a thought, but it's a terrible thought, but it's a realistic.
Go ahead.
Realistic only because I have a friend, a male friend, who recently had breast cancer and had to have surgery. So and until that happened with a friend,
it's not that
Doctor,
uncommon.
you became.
I have a cousin in Israel.
Hold on, Doctor, you became muted for a second.
oh
I have a cousin.
No, now we hear you. Doctor, let's let the doctor finish his comment.
no, I'm just saying until again that happened to me in terms of my friend having that, and it never crossed my awareness at all. Okay, that's a possibility, and that could
It's
happen.
not that uncommon, Bernie. I have a cousin in Israel, a young boy who had the surgery.
I'm just saying, to me, it was out of the blue. I had never.
Wow. We should have a refuah shlema.
Yeah.
And so Hashem made a miracle. Again, I do not want to get into contemporary events.
No. I'm just saying. You ask what?
Sure. No. Yeah. But certainly, this is an interesting.
I wonder why there was a need for such a spectacular miracle, which leaves so many questions unanswered, like what caliber of the person or what happened to him. after after the son wouldn't need being nursed, whether the breast went away or whatever. But usually we rely on Hashem for our parnasa. And if he didn't have money to pay for a vet nurse, it would be simpler to make sure he gets the money. So this miracle, I guess, serves just as an illustration and the basis for further discussion rather than a report of a real occurrence.
Well, I would be equally comfortable, and the Gemara certainly presents this as a real occurrence that was well known. Now, what I don't know, and I can't Google it because I don't know what's going to pop up until we find our answer, is it possible? Because today we know it, and again, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of talking about contemporary issues of gender dysphoria and the like, or transgender, which is a big topic. And again, I don't want to go there. But my simple question here is that today there's all kinds of hormone therapies. Is it biologically? And again, Hashem could do a miracle even if it's not biologically possible. But is there a biological possibility for a person to receive certain hormones and then for a man to lactate? I don't know, and I don't know about this.
I think that the miracle of providing the person with money happens every day to everybody. Yes. Because we really don't know the mechanism of this. And when we have money, we can ascribe it to Hashem, and everybody could do that. I mean, it's such a mundane miracle.
All right, so let's see. The Gemara actually, we're going to see now the Gemara's comments on the story, and we're going to see that much of what we just brought up is acknowledged to one extent or another, both the caliber of the person and the reason why Hashem chose to do this miracle. And I also want to show you 2 or 3 commentaries that discuss the story that add some other interesting components. Just Professor, I wanted to, because you said that it probably never happened, or it might have not happened, I just want to say 2 things. Maybe it was a miracle, not maybe, it's presented here as a miracle. But then that was my question. If biologically it's plausible, it's still a miracle because in those days they didn't have the capacity to introduce those hormones, but just to appreciate that the story very well may have occurred. But let's see the Gemara's commentary and then we'll see many of your thoughts acknowledged and addressed. Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef became aware, maybe experienced the story, and he says, check out what a special, remarkable individual this man must have been. That Hashem chose to give him a miracle like this. And Rabbi Steinsaltz, and I think accurately says of this magnitude. And the professor already gave us an answer before we even read further, which is, Parnasa, and the Gemara is going to have a different answer, but I want to first plug in the professor's comment. Parnasa, Hashem is constantly providing for us. And we know it's a miracle. And we know that everything that we have in our life is thanks to Hashem. But a miracle that happens on an ongoing basis becomes what we refer to as nature. And so we don't always appreciate the extent of Hashem's intervention, protection, and blessings. This person of a great caliber was provided a kind of miracle that nobody would have any other theory other than Hashem intervened and made a miracle for him. And this is a display of the person's worthiness, his zechus. And so Rav Yosef says, wow, that's a story that tells us this person must have been very great. This also responds to Reb Beryl's comment, which is we don't know his greatness. Well, Rav Yosef had the same question. And he said, clearly this story is an illustration of this man's greatness. Reb Beryl, your question remains, why don't we have his name? Well, maybe in addition to the miracle, there may have been a kind of stigma of sorts. I don't know. But either way, we don't get the name of every event that happens. Amarli Abaya has a counterpoint. Adarabba, on the contrary. And I'm going to read this comment, but I want you to ignore Rabbi Steinsaltz's translation so we can parse it together. Adarabba, on the contrary. Kama garua adam zeh. How garua? Dr. Hammer, what does the word garua mean?
Worse.
How bad? How not good? How detrimental? How this person is shenishtanu loy sidrei braces, that a miracle that teva, nature itself, had to be changed for that person to have what he needed. So my question for you right away is, okay, Rav Yosef says he's a great person, he received the miracle. Abaya seems to look down at this person, but I don't see, or not I don't see, but I want to hear from you how you might understand that it would be a garua, a bad thing for Hashem to alter nature itself. Isn't that a compliment? Like Rav Yosef says. Anyone want to share a insight or what that might mean? Dr.
Yeah,
Hammer.
I actually thought about it before. If you want to do a miracle, okay, and if the miracle is really to help the baby, then the baby needs milk. But in order to have milk, okay, if you do a miracle, you don't have to change the structure of the breasts of the male. Why can't you just leave them the way they are? You could do any miracle and have those breasts, those male breasts, lactate to the point where it's necessary, rather than cause attention to this person as being quote abnormal in his physical structure. So
Interesting.
That's my.
So you're saying what's garua is the fact that attention had to be drawn to the miracle, and that he had to carry around.
He could be drawn to the miracle, but no. It's not only a miracle. It's a distortion of the normal body, which in general is perceived insensitively by many people as being garua, worse than a normal body.
Interesting. So I think if we had to say it, kama garua, you know what's bad about the story? That he's going to be compelled to be perceived that the story will be perceived as garua. I just want to add something else that I thought that I think the doctor may have also been alluding to. When a person wins the lottery, not only they're able to provide their child sustenance, but they're also able to build an extension to the house and buy a yacht, a luxury car. And so when you hit the jackpot, the miracle also helps the father. This is the kind of miracle that only benefited the baby. And so Hashem had to go out of his, perhaps, I think the doctor, you started saying this. Hashem went out of his way to make a miracle that would not be at all for the enjoyment of the father. And so maybe that's how it is garua.
But Rabbi, I have a difficulty why we're concentrating on the individual. It has nothing to do with him. If Hashem decided to do this miracle, what do you want from this poor guy? Either make him big or small. He's just there.
No, we're not. We're trying to understand.
No, but you say Garuya Adam Hazeh.
Yeah.
What do you want from him?
Because we're saying that probably the event happened the way it did as a result of something about him. Right? He probably earned the Gemara's understanding that there may have been an association between his behavior and this miracle. So I want to give you another shot that I think you'll appreciate. Until now, we're understanding that this man is bad, dishonorable, as Rabbi Steinsaltz says. There's something wrong with the person for having a miracle happen for him, and that's not really fair. The guy just had an incredible miracle. So I want to give you an alternative way of reading this Gemara, which I think, Doctor, you'll appreciate. We're not saying the person is dishonorable. We don't want to put him down. Very simply, there's a famous statement Yaakov Avinu says after all the miracles happened and he's finally back on dry land and he's back in Eretz Yisrael, and he says, Katonti mikol hachasad mikol ha'emes asher asita odecha. I have become small for all the miracles and wonders that you've done for your servant. Ki b'makli avarti es hayarden hazeh. In my start, I just started out with a staff. V'ata yisa v'shtei machanais, and now I have all of these people and this wealth. And he's afraid of Esau. That's the prayer he says. Why did he say Katonti? I become small. So one of the very common understandings, and I think that's Pshat, that's the literal understanding of the story, is Katonti. My miracle credit my zechuyot have been diminished. Yaakov was a very, very fine tzaddik, but he was afraid, although incorrectly in this case, this is his humility speaking. He said, listen, I've done many good things in my life, but for Hashem to make such wonderful miracles, my zechuyot may have been diminished. I have less credit, either for future intervention by Hashem, or more importantly, in Olam Haba. And we actually talked about this on occasion in our Gemara earlier, you may recall. We talked about how Hashem sometimes wants to reward a Russia in this world so that they have less sachar in Olam Haba, and the opposite for a tzaddik. Occasionally, a tzaddik might have discomfort in this world, but it's all to magnify and maximize the zechuyot in that world. So maybe Abaye is saying, oh, this poor guy, he was in a pickle, Hashem intervened, but now he may have had a loss of credit, and so that's not a good thing for him. So we're not saying he is a bad person. we're saying he is in a bad predicament or not in an ideal situation because he had to have this work. That is another way of reading this that I think some of you might appreciate, that it's not a judgment on the character of the individual, but rather an assessment of what might.
Do we ever find out what happened to the son? Maybe the son became a goodel.
Maybe, probably. You know what? Maybe we do. I don't know. I just want to add, I want to add a few things. First of all, the commentaries, and the Maharsha quotes this, and others quote a very interesting medrash. The medrash says that Mordechai raised someone, not his biological daughter, I don't believe it. Well, no, not his biological daughter, niece, cousin, whatever it is. And the Megillah says, V'hi oimen es Hadassah, which means he raised or he adopted Hadassah. But the Medrash says that it literally can mean he nursed her. And the Medrash says a miracle happened, and Mordechai too is recorded as having temporarily been able to provide for Esther in the manner that, because she was an orphan and he, I guess, was single. And somehow he's able to provide for her in this miraculous way, like the subject of our story. Now, the commentaries quote this Medrash to ask the question: if we know that this is a story that happened with Mordechai HaTzadik, then how could you ever refer to this as Gerua, as being not ideal or bad? Obviously, Hashem is going to take care of Mordechai in an ideal scenario. And so the commentaries give different answers, but one answer I recall seeing, and I think it might be down here as well, is that, okay, one shot is that Mordechai had no choice. Mordechai had no choice because he needed to hide Esther, because there was a search, and Hashem needed Esther to not be discovered then, and to not be discovered nursing from her uncle, because then maybe she would be considered weird and undesirable to Achashverosh, and then the whole miracle would have never transpired. So the miracle needed to happen that way in the story of Esther. But in this case, Hashem could have just had him find a few bucks, or the bank could have unintentionally credited his account a few $1,000s, and he would have everything there. Or maybe someone would give him a gift of a Bitcoin, and he'd be quite all right. Another explanation I saw, which some of you might find appreciative, and let me just see if I can find over here. The Medrash Rabbah says like this. The lashon of the Medrash is V'haya manikahu. He nursed her. It doesn't say that he developed breasts. And so some of the commentaries say, well, just to be able to provide in a miraculous way would not be detrimental, but to have a change that could cause some social trouble or tension, that may have been a detrimental thing. Now, I want to just show you one more thing. Here, the Ben Yoyada, who, if you recall, we used to see a lot when we had other Agadic Gemaras, he says, if Hashem would give him money, even though that would be a miracle, well, he says what I said, it would still not be clear that it was a miracle as a result of his behavior. Maybe somebody else, he says something very interesting. He says sometimes when one person davens, other people with a similar need, even if their credit is less, find their tefillot answered to. A very interesting kind of Kabbalistically inspired teaching. And the example he gives is that when Sarah finally had a baby, no, so I believe Sarah, maybe Rivka actually. No, Rivka. When Rivka's prayers were answered and she had a child, finally, she was also barren for many years. We're taught, the Gemara says, Nifkidu kama karisima, many other women that were barren also had children. Sometimes when Hashem decides to direct Shefa, Garcha, to the world and answer the prayers, occasionally other people find their prayers answered alongside the tzaddik. And so if this guy would find money, maybe Hashem answered his prayers because some great tzaddik was davening for their needs, and Hashem also provided for him. But such a miracle, which only happened to him exclusively, is an indication that Hashem targeted him alone for this great bracha. That Hashem chose to do a miracle to point a spotlight on his tzidkus, on his righteousness. What would be the counterpoint? So the Ben Yoyada also comments on Abaya's statement that it was Garua. So he says, let's look at the line again. It says, Kama Garua Adam Zesh Nishtana Loi Sidrevesh. That for him, nature was changed. So there's two problems. First of all, his body had to change, which is, it could always be taxing or, draining. And also because this miracle does not create goodness for anyone else. Because usually if you'd have money, you could have given tzedakah. And so therefore, the miracle would have had a communal effect. He'd come into shul, he'd make a kiddush, he'd give meiser, he'd give tithes, and then it would be something that would bring hana to the world. But here, nasa loines, the only person who could possibly have any kind of hana, any kind of benefit from this story is the child and him himself, that he has to provide for the child.
If he comes to shul, what side of the mechitza do you put him?
I'm sorry.
If he
Okay,
would come to shul,
let's respectfully avoid let's avoid that discussion for now, because it could be sensitive, because it's anyways. Okay, if you have a halachic shaila, I'll be happy to give you any guidance that I can. But then he said something else, which I'll just read because we already have it open. The Sefer Hadaris, it says that we talk sometimes in the Kabbalistic writings about Gilgulim, the shamans that come down again. So he says, when Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was a child, there's a famous story, I think we learned it in our Gemara, he was swapped with another baby and he was adopted because they challenged to see if he was circumcised. It was the time of the decrees, the Hadrianic decrees against circumcision. And so Rabbi was nursed for a while at the people that were hosting him. And they saved Rabbi from the death. And so the Sefer Hadaris says that this man had the neshama of the lady who nursed Rabbi. And so he had a miracle that was along the same genre of the chesed that she did for Rebbe before them. And although presently he was a poor person, in the prior Gilgul he was a royalty. And so there's an interesting angle presented about Gilgulim. All right, let's continue because the Gemara is not yet done and we'll find some more. I'm sorry, go ahead.
In a serious note that might sound a little strange, one could come up with a narrative in a scenario where after his own child was nursed, you talked before about people couldn't afford, that this continued, and I'm not talking about as a business, but as a mitzvah for other children who would have died if not for having the milk of whatever. So
you're saying it's plausible that he could have done something to benefit others.
Right.
But
I'm not talking about betting for himself. I'm not talking about. I'm just saying.
Interesting.
I could see a mashal there in a children's book about people making fun of somebody because they were different in appearance, and how somehow this landed up being for the good.
I like that. You're saying there's a story. Someone will look at this person, the kids might start laughing at him, but really, he was a great tzaddik, and what happened was a miracle, and Hashem was showing everyone what a tzaddik is. So it's a lesson that we have to be respectful of.
Right, of all differences and everything. Right?
I like it.
Good.
Thank you. All right. Let us see. The Gemara is not done yet. Amar Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda said in regards to this story of the man who was able to miraculously nurse his child. Ba Yurei, an interesting commentary that's born out of the story. And the professor, I believe, may have referenced this as well. Ba Yurei kama kashim mizanoisav shel adam. Take a look at how challenging it is for a person to have their sustenance provided for them. And the insinuation here is that we're talking about as if to say that in Shemayim, it's hard to provide for a person that, for whatever reason, doesn't have parnasa. Shenishtano olav sidrei bereishis, that it was easier, caveat, as if to say it was easier to change the all of nature and make this man present biologically with the ability to nurse his child than to cause him to find a chest of gold or to have a piece of, gold come down from heaven or a wallet or whatever.
Right.
Rav Nachman said a similar comment. Teda, no. You know how you know that it's so hard to provide parnasa? It's easier to have a crazy outer miracle than mizoinus, which literally means sustenance, food, should suddenly come forth. And so for a person to find what they need is not an easy process. And so Rashi says, he says the process, the gate of parnasa, of income, is hard for a person to achieve, to the point where, again, a miracle can happen from heaven. let me take that back for a moment. Because Rashi learned this statement a little differently. He says, look around. We find miracles, life-saving miracles, but we don't find a miracle that a person will suddenly find money. And I don't remember who made this comment, but it's true that maybe the professor, we have miracles happen every day, but the type of miracles that happen are usually more life-saving miracles, right? We all know many times that we were so close to an accident or to this, or God forbid a car jumped the corner, or we were almost in a place, etc., etc. There are many, many miracles that come to life-saving, but less so, as Rashi says, we don't find that suddenly food should land in a tzaddik's house. Or an empty storage house should suddenly have a lot of grain. And so we understand from here that it's a big deal for a miracle regarding parnasa or mizoinus, sustenance to happen. Let me just go back. Because I think he comments. Bear with me just another moment. No, surprised there. By the way, we're not done with intriguing stories, so don't go anywhere. Rashi elsewhere comments that it does happen on occasion. There are some stories in the Gemara where miracles did happen. The Gemara tells a story of Rabbi Lazar ben Birta, who had a little bit of grain and suddenly was full of grain, and other such stories, but it's very, very uncommon. Interesting. The Maharal. And then with that, we'll go to the next story. The Maharal says something very interesting. The Maharal says, and Professor, I think you might like this. He says, why is it easier, so to speak, for a miracle to be performed than to provide sustenance? He says like this. In a way, providing food is a bigger miracle because a miracle is typically just altering that which already exists in the world. So for example, we have a Moshe's or Aaron's staff turned into a snake. So you had something and it changed, but it already existed in this world. For example, it's a miracle, it's breaking Teva, but it's using materials, if you will, that already exist. Mizoinus is not a change. It's the introduction of something that never existed. If food would suddenly land on the floor, a case of formula would land at his door, or whatever, that would be a miracle of something that doesn't exist and bringing it into this world. Because a person more generally achieves parnasa by way of Hashem's intervention, and because even the regular parnasa we see, not a miraculous way, Hashem is causing stuff to be available for us. This is in a way, a greater shilai. Take it or leave it, but that's what the Maharal says. Now let's see another story that's also going to be thought-provoking. Amar Rav Yehuda. No. Tan Rabbanan. If Raisa tells another story. Masa be'isha echad. It's a story of a woman who passed on, and in a matter of merit, different story. Masa ba'adam echad shenasa isha gidemes. A man once married a woman who was a gidem. Rashi says, yada ketua. She was an amputee. One of her arms were amputated. And he never became aware of the fact that she was an amputee until the day of her passing. That's the story. Amarav, I could stop you and we can have a lot of thoughts, but let's just see the commentary here. Amarav, this story tells us how modest this woman must have been that her husband never had the opportunity to notice that her arm was missing. How discreet she was. She did a good job keeping her amputation under the wraps. Rabbi Chia says, don't give her so much credit. If a person, God forbid, has to have an amputation, they might be inclined to cover it up. Or Rashi says, generally women of that era were pretty much covered up. I think akin to what today, you might say in certain countries, people wear burqas or whatever. But this man, how did he not notice the fact that he didn't notice his wife's missing a limb, that is a credit to him. So it's a little bit of an interesting machlokes. I'm not sure this rubs everyone's modern sensibilities exactly right, but that's the story. A person that was an amputee, a woman who was an amputee, and her husband somehow never was aware of this fact.
Rabbi, just to go back to that previous story, I looked online and male lactation is rare, but it does exist.
And I should have also looked over here, but I think Rabbi Steinsaltz may make a similar comment. He says, while this is not a common phenomenon, it's not impossible. Similar phenomena are found in other species as well. And the subject is even discussed in halachic literature. So it could happen. It's not a common event to happen. And for it to happen precisely the moment that the man who was so impoverished that he couldn't have it happen is certainly a divine intervention.
But what's interesting that it doesn't require development of breast. It's just some more of a hormone that's already there.
All right.
That was
Very,
right.
very interesting. Shalom Eida. Shalom Eida. We shouldn't know such tragedies. And if you think about this woman, a life of tragedy. She was an amputee. That must have not been easy. And actually, I should clarify. Yidemis doesn't necessarily mean an amputee. It could be she was born that way. Actually, what Rashi says, the other two, her hand was cut. So we'll go with Rashi. She wasn't.
Maybe her husband was blind.
Maybe. That's not what the story seems to indicate. So let's take a look at the Ben Yoyada. He asks. Well, actually, before that, the Gemara actually tells us that a person has to see their prospective spouse before they get married. And so that brings up a discussion in some of the commentaries. How could it even happen that the person should never see his wife? And what does that really mean? And is that really healthy in a marriage? So there's different discussions. It's brought some, first of all, maybe he saw her face, not her arm, which is still, again, a question. We find a similar thing by Avraham Avinu. It says that, he says, Hine, what did he say when he goes to Egypt? He tells her, Hine Isha, who remembers the exact lashon? Anyways, he says basically, Hine no yadati, I now become aware that you're a good-looking woman. And Rashi says, or the commentaries say, now he knows, but he didn't know her all her life. She's already not a young woman. And so the Gemara there, or the Rashi there also quotes that they were very modest, and so this, whatever that means. So also the commentaries say maybe by a tzaddik, a person that's very righteous, and that's somehow maybe there may be some kind of waiver there for the inspection of the prospective spouse. I just want to add something else that adds a little bit of an interesting context. You see, we'll go to the other first. One more second. Oh, so how did he know when she passed away? Or what brought it to his attention then? Again, it may be a silly question, but the answer is interesting. So the commentaries say maybe Hashem allowed him, presented this fact to him so that he would have a degree of comfort appreciating her great righteousness. Then he says something interesting. Maybe, how did he not know? Because maybe the doctors made a very, very realistic looking prosthetic. A wooden Yad Shel Eitz. Maybe they did a really, really high grade, high quality prosthetic arm. And it was placed in the location of the amputation. And nobody noticed. And then in this commentary, he writes.
But Rabbi, it's not a question. If you look at the Hebrew, that he didn't know it until she died, doesn't automatically mean that he found out when she died.
That is correct. That is
just
correct.
Never knew.
So, but how does anybody know this story? Let's say. But you're actually making an interesting point. You could read it two ways. But the way it says, he didn't know about it. He didn't know about it until the day of death. So you can either read it, he found out the day of death, or he never ever knew. But the fact that the story is recorded makes it. Let me read this commentary. I see the doctor. You need to say something.
Yeah, I'm disturbed by the idea that this fellow, we're thinking about him at all positively. Okay, just think about it. Forget about the prosthesis for the moment. Okay. Here you have a frum person. Okay. I could just think of every day. Okay. Forget, but let's talk about Shabbos. Your wife goes to light Shabbos candles. Okay. With one arm. Okay. She goes to make a bracha covering up her face. She needs help with the dishes. She needs help with, we don't even talk, do they have children, don't they? I'm not going to go there. It's not it's okay, not important to the story. I find this so anti helping another human being whom you supposedly care about. I find, I really have a strong aversion to this being in the Gemara as something that is very important for us to know.
The story certainly provokes. The story certainly provokes.
I see the opposite.
Yeah.
That he knew and he loved her. He just didn't recognize it. He just took her for what she was. It never bothered him to see it or to dwell on it.
So I just want to add, the story certainly provokes a lot of very, very interesting questions and ideas. And I think we must realize that in different times and different ages, there's different cultural norms, both about the interaction. Maybe people, maybe she said, honey, what's wrong with your arm? Why aren't you moving it? Oh, no, nothing, maybe once upon a time that could fly. She had one working arm. I don't know. I just want to share with you this interesting story. I don't have all the answers. It's certainly a story that brings up a lot of questions. She says maybe she had a prosthetic, and then when it came to the burial, there was a shaila of what to do with the hand, because there's all different kinds of halachic questions about what to do with the prosthesis after a person's passing. And so maybe this whole halachic dilemma brought the story to the public, and that's how the public knows it. And so they asked the husband, how do you feel about this? Maybe he gave the story, and they found out. And that's how we knew that she was lame or missing an arm. There is another way of reading the Gemara that might make you all feel a lot better. Maybe we're not talking about the husband noticing it. Maybe we're talking about the public noticing it. This would make you feel a lot better. So she was very modest, and she didn't broadcast it. Now, that would be a problem according to Rav's reading, who says, the husband didn't notice it. But then maybe we'll go to Reb Berel's commentary that he didn't notice it, it didn't bother him, but everyone else didn't notice it. Or maybe he's saying, Isha. Okay, my attempted reading doesn't fit really well with this gears of the Gemara, but it seems like there are maybe other gearses that understood it to be that the other people didn't notice it, and maybe we only found out about it after passing when this whole story came up. Anyways, that's the story. 2 stories about the tragic loss of an individual, and following the passing, a 2-directional discussion or 2 opinions about exactly what to make of the story. We have the story of the man who was able to miraculously lactate to provide for his child, and we have the opinion that it was a wonderful miracle, or the other opinion, which is that it was less wonderful or maybe not so advantageous for him, which allowed us to talk about the contrast between miracles, generally speaking, and the miracle of providing mazoinus, sustenance for a person, and how that's a big miracle, and it changes and the like. And then we have the second story, this woman that was an amputee, and it wasn't noticed. And the question is, who gets more credit for this, the husband or the wife? And that's the Gemara's commentary, and a very interesting, thought-provoking story. I told you yesterday we're going to read 2 stories. I said you're going to read a story that's going to keep everyone very curious. With a few minutes that remain, let's jump into a little bit of the next section of the Gemara, which is an analysis of the Hebrew words used in the Mishnah that we didn't have a translation, and this too will be interesting. Zecharim yotzim livuvim. The rams, the male goats, can go out livuvim. My livuvim. What is the definition of livuvim? Amar Rav Huna says it is tutare. Tutare means they are tied together in pairs to prevent them from escaping. Goats could be very spirited. You don't want to necessarily tie them down to a something. So you want to tie them to one another so they can move around, but they don't have the ability to move at a fast pace, but they go in pairs. Hold on 1 second. All right. Amar Rav Huna, No, my mashma. Why do we understand that the word luvuvin means lishna de krovihu, that they were close together, animals? The ksiv li baftini achoisi kala. This is in Shir Hashirim. You have drawn me near, so li baftani means drawing near. So that's how Rav Huna understands. The Mishnah says luvuvin. It means two animals in close proximity, tied together, stuck together. Another interpretation. Amar Ula disagrees. Ula says, you know what levuvim means? Levuvim means ar shekaishim lahem keneged libam, a kind of hide that's affixed to cover their heart, a kind of armor, kedei shelo yiplu aleim ze'evim, to protect them from wolves who would attack the rams. And Rashi says, derech ze'evim lechois behema beliva. The wolves, when they attack the rams, they tend to bite and to attack them around where the heart is. So if you put on some if you put on some armor, you'll protect them. The Gemara asks, Evim ascharim nafli anakevis lenafli. Explain this to me, please. Only the male rams need protection, need this armor. Why aren't the female animals also in jeopardy? The Gemara says no. Mishum de misagu b'reish edra. The rams tend to go at the front of the pack, at the front of the flock, and therefore they are more vulnerable. So the Gemara says, okay, but it was the Evim b'reish adra nafli. You think the wolves don't know how to work around the whole pack? Why do you think they're only coming to the front? Besides edra nafli, they don't attack them at the back. Ella mishum de shamimi. These rams are also very fat, and so there's a lot of food to eat. So if you're going to choose one of the animals to attack, you're going to attack the one that has the most flesh. You don't think there are any fat females? Only the males are fat. Do the wolves have a special method to determine the gender from far off? So why is it that we're more concerned about the rams, than their female counterparts? They walk with a certain kind of trot, with their noses up, which the wolves read their body language as aggressive, and they are provoked by them to attack the rams, and therefore the rams are provided with some extra protection. Rashi, Demaski, when they go, Mahalchin, the Seif Edra, Kidavim, Abitim Kan Bekan, they look around, they have a certain kind of, what do you call that? So they have a certain, they've got attitude. And the wolves are provoked, and so they tend to be attacked more frequently, and therefore they're provided with extra protection. An interesting little segment on what we might call some animal psychology, why these animals are seen as vulnerable. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak has a third opinion on what levuvim are. This was a type of hide that was tied to prevent the male rams from mounting the females, and so they would attach it. Mimai. How do we infer that levuvim means to prevent the male animals from mounting the female counterparts? Midiktani Seifa, read the next line. It says that the sheep, the females, go out shechuzais. My shechuzais, what is the word shechuzais? They would occasionally tie the tails up when it was mating season and they wanted to encourage breeding. So they would tie up the tail in such a manner. And so if we're talking about the different techniques of breeding or not, so now Reisha Kadesh Loyala Kavis, the first half of the Mishnah is birth control to prevent the males from mounting the females. And the second half of our Mishnah is techniques to encourage the mounting of the females. So three opinions what levuvim means. Either it's to tie the animals in pairs, or it was a kind of leather that would protect their more vulnerable, the rams more vulnerable chest, heart area where wolves typically attack them. We had a lengthy discussion why the rams are more in jeopardy, and it's because of their attitude, because of how they walk. They apparently provoke the wolves. And then the third interpretation is it was a way of tying them in a way that would prevent them from mounting their female counterparts.
Rabbi,
Yes,
what does this have to do with Shabbos?
it has to do with the fact that the Mishnah lists among the items that an animal may and may not wear. It says that let's actually pull up the text. It's a good question. The Mishnah says rams may go out levuvim yoitzois levuvim. They're allowed to go out in the state of levuvim. So we want to know, what does it mean levuvim? What is the license? So three opinions. Are they able to go out when they're protected from mounting their counterparts? Is it a security mechanism to protect them from running too far away? Or is it to protect them from wolves, a common predator against or for these animals? All right. The Gemara now continues. How do you know that the word shechuzais means that the sheep have their tails up to be exposed to encourage breeding? There's a verse in Kohelet that says like this: behold, there met him a woman with the attire of a zona, a harlot, and wily of heart. Shit, zona, which is a promiscuous and suggestive form of dress, applied to animals means a kind of mode that would be suggestive to the rams to encourage breeding. And the word shit zona is similar to shchuzot, the same idea. We'll do a little more. The ewes go out kivulois. My kivulois. This is the way the tail will be tied down to restrict and to make them inaccessible to the nose. My mashma the high kavel the word kavel, how do we know that it means to not allow reproduction? We have a verse describing a very interesting dialogue between Shlomo HaMelech and King Hiram. Famously, Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis Hamikdash. He had some friends and allies, and one of his good allies, well recorded in Tanakh, was King Hiram, who helped him in accessing all different kinds of materials, particularly I think it was wood, right? And King Hiram was the king to the north in the area that's today Lebanon, I believe, Tyre. And so here's the verse. So Shlomo HaMelech received these materials and he gifted or exchanged King Hiram the proceeds of the productivity of certain cities under Shlomo HaMelech's ownership. And when he got this gift, he asked, what are these cities that you've given me, Achi, my brother? An endearing reference to King Shlomo. He was complaining that he felt those lands were not so productive. And he called those lands the lands of Kabul. Rashi. We're talking about the 22 cities that Shlomo HaMelech gifted King Hiram. The question that arises immediately is, would Shlomo HaMelech give away lands in Israel? And so the Gemara answers, the common explanation is he didn't give the lands, he gave a certain amount of proceeds or something to that effect. So what is Eretz Kabul? He called it the land of Kabul. My Eretz Kabul. The people there were tied down. They were surrounded by their wealth of silver and gold. Okay, that sounds like a pretty good place to have the proceeds. If you have to go into business, wouldn't you rather go into business with the people that are doing okay? Obviously, the businesses are profitable. Rava explained or asked, if that's the case, why was Hiram disappointed about this gift? He was disappointed because they were very, very affluent and productive, obviously. So here we have a very interesting comment. Yes, he was disappointed. Kiva the Atirium is being that these people were well-to-do, somewhat spoiled, like of the Avidita, they weren't really working very hard, and therefore, ironically, their wealth prevented them from being more productive, and therefore Hiram felt that this city was not going to give him the maximum potential available to him. I believe the understanding is that although they were wealthy, they should have been harvesting and gathering and providing for Hiram, and they weren't doing a great job because of their general comforts. Is that rain? Is he diving out there? The AC on? It's comfortable? The AC are on. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar Eretz Chomtim. This was the land of Chomton. We had this before. It was a sandy expanse of this very salty material. Malchom is bekas, it's salty. And if you might recall, it was used as a preservative earlier on in the Gemara. Amaikar the Kavel. Why was the land called Kavel? The Mishtagra Bakara at Kabbalah. When you step in it, the earth was very soft and it would sink to the ankle. I mean, Inchi Ara the Chabalta, the law of the period. This is a land that didn't produce much fruits. Its value was simply mining and extracting this preservative salts from the land. And I guess Hiram felt that he could have done better than that. This concludes today's Gemara. Just to do a fast recap. Today we studied two stories. We spent a long time discussing them, and then we continued analyzing a few words which describe states and arrangements that animals are allowed to be in on Shabbos. Levuvos was the main one. We had three different explanations. All of the explanations entail something being affixed to the animal. Either it's tied to another animal, or there's a piece of leather on its chest, a type of armor, or preventing it from mounting its female counterparts. And the Gemara makes clear that those are permissible on Shabbos. Obviously, it's important to identify what is the real shot, if it's one or the other. Maybe tomorrow we'll take a little bit of a look into that. And then we gave some other interpretations. The bottom line is all of the words that we're using today were all associated with either birth control or encouraging the mounting of the males to the females to increase the flock. We wanted to understand what the word we wanted to understand what the word kivulos was, which we said meant not productive, to tie them down to prevent reproduction. We wanted to understand the word kabul, and we explored a verse in the book of Kings that describe, who's he? That describes an interesting conversation between Hiram and Shlomo, and ultimately it means unproductive. My dear friends, I hope you consider today's learning.
Rabbi,
Hold on. Give me a second. I hope we'll consider today's learning productive. I want to thank you all for being here, and I hope you'll join us tomorrow for some more such discussion in the Gemara. Let's mention, as when we started, we'll mention Meir ben Alexander, whose yahrzeit is today, and we'll mention Yosef and Lady Yitzchak. If Nachman's father, whose yahrzeit will be tomorrow night and Friday. Neshama Shavin Aliyah. Rabbi, please ask the way.
Do we have any comment on why we have these two stories out of left field here, Dafka?
Can I ask you, what do you think? Why would it be introduced here? What's the
If I would know, I wouldn't ask the question.
Anybody want to try to give a theory? We're talking about the lactation of livestock. We're talking about lactation and drying up and becoming available, right? And so I believe that's probably the source.
Nice try. Now tell me about the one-armed woman.
Yeah.
Once we told a story about a woman that passed away and the virtue of the spouse, we tell another story about a person that passed away and the virtue of the spouse or herself. So it's the Gemara style occasionally to parenthetically or to add something just slightly associated, and that's what happened in this Gemara, I believe. Rebel, it's actually a good question, and I could take a look. I'm sure the other commentaries have other hooks and reasons why it's introduced, but that's generally how I understand it. Anyone want to disagree or give another theory why those stories are brought in?
To me, it sounds like a good story, but to me too, it doesn't seem like it fits well into the Gemara. There's no names mentioned, nothing.
It is the nature. It is in character of the Gemara to introduce such a story in such a moment. The Gemara obviously wants us to know those stories. They're important stories, and this is a wonderful place to introduce it to us. And it also allows us to change the subject a little bit and have some interesting and thought-provoking, dare I say, controversial conversations.
That I
so,
must agree with.
So I want to thank you all for being here today. Have a great day. Hope to see you all tomorrow.
Koyach, thank
yeah.
you.
Shkoyach.